Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh. Very good day to you. Welcome to another edition of Life Matters, where every life matters. Stay with me and I'll hopefully keep you very calm and collected as we touch on balancing cultural and Islamic identities. What is that? But to expound more, we have our Islamic therapist online all the way from the Western Cape. But don't forget, we want you to interact with us. Tell us how you're feeling today. Tell us how you're coping with the narrative. Which ones are you listening to? How is it affecting you? Is it maybe bothering your sleep? Is it something that's on your mind all the time? As we know, we relate a lot to what's happening to Palestine and the conflict in the world. So let us reach out to each other and support each other as well. Our partners, our siblings, our parents, because they're possibly in the same situation. It is something that is on our mind all the time. So I hope you're coping well with it. And if you are, or even not, please do interact with us. We love how you make the show. Any input, any questions regarding, some of the shows that we have on air, but don't forget you can catch them on our YouTube channel. Let's now welcome our guest, Yasmina Samaai, all the way from the Western Cape in the lovely, beautiful mother city in our Cape Town studios. Assalamu alaikum to Yasmina.
Walaikum salam wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh.
Shukran for joining us once again on this series of creating a happy and healthy home for our little ones. Today, we're discussing how we can balance that cultural and Islamic identities. Firstly, let's quickly unpack this topic. What is it that we're trying to say when we say there's a cultural and there's an Islamic identity? Could you distinguish between the two, inshallah?
Yes. Yes, so we oftentimes get these two mixed up. Mm-hmm. So if we look at culture, so culture would be, we look at perhaps traditions, things that are embedded in our practices from the past. But then we look at Islamic culture. So Islamic culture it's the same ultimately, but it more comes from Islamic practices that are now embedded. So if I just look at the Cape Town context, for example, our South African context, and we look at what are some of our culture and heritage that impacts us today, so many years later after slavery. And if you want to distinguish between the two, then we'd say that, within our Cape Town context, we've actually adopted cultures from all over. So I would say Malaysia, Indonesia, India, all over, because these are places where we had our we had slaves, prisoners, political prisoners, etc., brought right down here to South Africa. So if we look at what practices they brought from those spaces and what they've now planted here as prisoners, and later on from generations thereafter freed individuals, we still practice those things today. So that's the difference. So culture would be more traditions, etc. But you'd also see people often say things like spiritual or religion, etc. So religion and culture is very different. So you can have the same religion, but you can have you can have cultural differences. So these are the main difference between the two. But at the same time, besides the fact that you get culture, you also get Islamic culture. And this is what makes us different, is that it's rooted in Islamic practices.
So, Yasmina, we know that many Muslim families navigate between cultural practices and this Islamic teachings, as you mentioned. How can parents strike a balance to ensure a strong Islamic identity while still respecting their cultural traditions?
Culture is actually, if you look at the Arabic origin for culture, so that would actually be thaqafa. And if you look at what this means, so there's various different meanings, and oftentimes in different sciences, in Islamic sciences. But let's just look at the meaning of, for example, intelligence, what it means to straighten.
Okay.
And this is where we basically get that they are trying to push us or steer us in a certain way to have admirable attributes as let's say, a Muslim, if you look at Islamic culture. So I wouldn't say these two necessarily clash. So as parents, when we're trying to find this balance between culture and our Islamic principles, what that actually requires of us, and I say this quite a bit in previous shows as well, it requires as parents to be able to have that knowledge of what are Islamic principles. So we'd have to know, okay, what does the Sharia deem to be correct and what does the Sharia deem to be incorrect? And only once we have this information would we then be able to say, okay, so these various influences, these various cultural influences that are impacting me, I would now then have this filtration system, to put it that way, to be able to see, okay, so these are some of the practices that are passed down from generation to generation, traditions. Now we see, okay, we scrutinize and say, okay, are these cultural practices, are these okay according to my Islamic principles? In other words, what the Sharia deems to be correct and incorrect. And it definitely doesn't have to clash. So I would say that in order to see, okay, are these practices good or bad, and we're using the Sharia, if it is good practices, and not to say, and I'm not even going to discuss the topic of bid'ah, etc. But if these are things that are to push a narrative of doing good, for example, so these cultural practices push what is good, then I would say practice those things, because ultimately our deen wants what's good for mankind. So these are the things that we should take into consideration when these cultural practices. But if we look now how the influences that we have right now, so we find ourselves, especially now in the Muslim minority country that we are in, we find ourselves, say a simple example would be couples now that get married. Now you would find husband and wives that are getting married, but perhaps the wife's family or the husband's families are not Muslim. So maybe they are Christian or whatever else. Yeah, so she turned Muslim or he turned Muslim, but the family doesn't have the same religion, or like differentiated between the two, so they don't have the same culture. Now you're getting married to this individual. So now we see, okay, so this individual became Muslim, and now you have the same foundation. Okay, you are practicing Islamic Sharia, so you're practicing Islamic law. However, you must remember that this individual did not have the same cultural upbringing as you. So perhaps they're going to madrasa, they're going to all those different classes to be able to establish their foundational sciences. But they're also impacted by traditions and cultural activities that they now might want to bring into marriage. So as the spouse, you then have to see, are these things Islamic? So are these things going against my Sharia? Yeah. Or are these things perhaps facilitating the practice of my Sharia? A simple example would be if the families may be non-Muslim and they practice things like Thanksgiving that just passed, and Christmas and things like that. So these are the things that you're going to have to filter for yourself and say, okay, these are the things that we want to raise our children in. Because remember, what you're doing now is going to become part of your culture, let's say, if that continues. So if you're raising your children from a young age, that they have Christmas, they have Eid, they have Easter, they have all those various practices, and eventually they raise their children like that, and their children like that, that is how traditions are being formed. So you are now combining the two with regards to your children. And it's innocent when we think of it at the beginning, because you see, it's okay. They can get Christmas presents, they can get the Eid money, and things like that. I'm not sitting here saying what's right and what's wrong, because preservation of family is also very important. It's one of the so maqasid of the Sharia as well, objectives of the Sharia, is to preserve that lineage, etc. But you have to also see what is it that you're teaching your children and exposing them to, these traditions, etc., that you are starting to instill. So this is just one aspect of the duty of a parent, but there's so many more.
It's interesting that you bring up that topic of Christmas and the holiday season, because I know a young lad that's going to get married soon, and his wife's family is non-Muslim, and her family often invites her over for Christmas. And he was saying that, listen, I've never celebrated Christmas before. I'm not going, we're not going. And this is even before they're married already. So now they have to look at, sitting down. And these are the conversations they need to have, because as much as, wanting to be together is, exciting and it brings intense happiness, they have to think of the future and what is possibly going to, stunt that relationship if there's going to be any potholes. So important to have these conversations, and also shows like this will help us direct, alhamdulillah, inshallah rather, in the correct way to think. So balance that rich heritage that we have with what you've been dealing with Islamically. I want to look at cultural diversity, but we have to go and pay the bills, Yasmina. When we get back, inshallah, we'll talk more after this, balancing cultural and Islamic identities, more just after the short break. Welcome back. How do we navigate between our cultural practices and Islamic teachings, the principles of Islam? Do we negotiate on it? Are we still taking some sort of knock on our Islamic identity? And how do we encompass that when we are faced with diversity of our neighbors, our family that we're going to get married into, and our children being exposed to that at school as well? Online from the Western Cape, we have our Islamic therapist, Yasmina Samaai, guiding us through balancing this cultural diversity as with in line with our Islamic principles. So welcome back, Yasmina. I want to now dig into the cultural diversity. Now, we know Islam encompasses a rich diversity of cultures worldwide, and so relevant in Cape Town, Alhamdulillah, where you grew up. How can Muslim families embrace that diversity, enjoy it, still celebrate it, still identify with it, while maintaining a strong connection to our Islamic principles?
Mm. Yes, I especially like this question because just recently I completed a module in it's Islamic history, but we started with the history of Islam, but then we actually zoomed into our South African context, and then we looked at how Islam was established within South Africa, and it's just, I think I could speak days on that. It was a lovely lecture. But on that, we see that we have such rich heritage. And I would say perhaps if I look at my generation or so, this is probably something that a lot of us are not aware of. So we look at apartheid as something, oh, that was between them at that time. And we don't necessarily look at our Muslims that fought for our freedom and what they stood for and what they brought. We don't look back into the time of the Dutch and the time of the British and what they brought, and we don't look back. And here we have the museum. And in all honesty, I was quite disappointed when I went to the museum, because now knowing all this information from this history module, going to the museum, I was thinking, okay, I'll take my husband and my child and I'll teach them everything as we walk into the museum. But there is actually not a very good display on the Islamic aspect, the Muslims that came down from Indonesia, from India, from Malaysia, and all those places. There's not enough that represents just how much they have brought to the Cape, because that is where our Islam was established. Because if you look at Africa, then you would see on top, so we have Egypt and we have all those Muslim countries over there. And you'd think, so Islam filtered down from the top down, because as scholars moved, etc. But then why isn't it that it didn't reach the tip of Africa? And this is where all that influence comes in. So that's it, because we were colonized and things like that. And to think that Islam was brought to this tip of Africa via the seas, just
amazing.
And so to think that all these, and it came with prisoners. Yeah. So those individuals, those mothers, those kids, and so they lost their fathers or their mothers, etc., and lost them to being captured and being brought as slaves here. That is how our Islam was established over here. Alhamdulillah, so it began with hardship, but then it ended here. Alhamdulillah, and look at us now. I mean, we are so lucky that we have, and if you look at across the world, and everybody would tell you this, but you won't actually appreciate it unless you travel.
Yes.
But look at Muslim minority countries. And look at the power us as Muslims have here within South Africa, and how much say we have and how much sway we have in our governments. And this is not the case around the world, but you take advantage of this, or you don't see the blessing in this because you don't travel and you don't see the difficulties other Muslim minorities are facing. So it's very important for us to know our heritage, to be able to teach our children. This is this is how Islam has brought to us. This is how we became Muslim. These are our ancestors. These are, we perhaps have Indonesian blood in us. We have these practices. If you just look at some of the words that we use here in Cape Town, we use words like labaran, or we use words
Kanala.
like Buba, Kanala, and all those words. So it's so, I mean, I'm teaching my 2-year-old little girl things, so every time she sees something, I'll say, Kanala, mommy, and then you think back and you think, but where does this come from?
Yeah.
And these words, these practices were brought across the seas to us here in the Cape. And I think it's so important for us to teach our kids this because it just embeds the fact that it's necessary for us to preserve that heritage.
Yeah.
And sometimes people think of culture as being something as negative. But actually, if you look at our culture as Muslims here within South Africa, we have such a rich and just a wonderful heritage. And the people that fought for our Islam here, the difficulties that they faced, that we are able to, I'm able to walk like this in my hijab. Just yesterday, I was able to swim in a complete burkini. And we have the freedom to be able to do these things. That it's not practiced all over the world. Why do we have this freedom here? And Islam is so fresh. It's still fairly fresh here within South Africa compared to other parts of the world. And why is it that you have places like Spain, etc., for example, where those places had Islamic influence so many years ago. So now if you go there now, all we have is the architecture. But there's not that strong Islamic influence. You will come here to the Cape and think, oh, but there must have been Islam here for so many years. No, Islam was maybe, I won't say lost, but if we look at other countries, Islam filtered away slowly but surely. But why is it here in the Cape? It's so fresh, but at the same time, we have a way of preserving it so well here. We have good structures in place. We're in government. We are so lucky and fortunate here. But we will take this for granted if we don't educate all the generations to come. Why do we have it this way? And what is the part that you as an individual are going to play into preserving our Islam here in Cape Town so that we don't lose this? And I'm sounding so very much confident in this topic, but it mainly comes from, and I'm not sure who knows the Sheikh, Sheikh Taha Karan. So I love listening to his lectures in the car, and he has a specific lecture, a couple of lectures where he talks about Muslim minorities. And he actually speaks to us and says, we must be so grateful for how we have this preservationist approach within South Africa, where we are kind of strict on our culture and our traditions, not to the point where we say, okay, it's haram if we don't do those things, because that would also become halal, haram, haram, halal. But we took this preservationist approach. But look where that approach got us. It got us to the point where we can freely practice. We got to a point where, alhamdulillah, we have the luxury where our Islam wasn't lost, no matter how much negative influence there might have been over the years. So yes, I think it's very important.
I love how passionate you are. And as a Cape Townian myself, I am also very proud of the rich heritage that Islam has brought to the tip of Africa. Because that's where Islam first established in South Africa, and then it spread, to the various provinces. So when you explain understanding the cultural influences and how it bases how we practice our Islam, how we make our dhikr, because there's some influences from Indonesia, from the Asian world, and also the words like kanala. There's even a dictionary. So I just want you to maybe give some examples, if you have any, of how we can create those cultural influences within practicing Islam, within practicing our religion. Still, maybe picking up that dictionary. I know there's a cup. I don't know what it's called, but a book up dictionary with just the jargon that's available, the conversations we need to have with our children when it comes to Islamic practices and how it balances, because that's what Islam is about. We balance, we practice Islam with moderation. And I'm so grateful, alhamdulillah, to be South African, not just Cape Town, but South African, because for our government to be standing up against Israel, which I had a conversation with someone yesterday, saying that, South Africa is not a Muslim country, but, maybe our government, there's lots of wrong that they do. There's corruption. In everywhere there's corruption. But this person was saying they come from Turkey, which is, so-called Muslim-based, and yet they can't practice their political stances the way they want to. There's some underhanded influence with regards to Israel. But here, we come from an apartheid generation, and we can use that cultural influence of how we stood up because of what we believed. And now we can all come together, respect each other. So let's just expound on maybe some examples how we can appreciate other cultures and still be Muslim.
Yes. Yes, so the book that you're actually referring to, I think it's called Caps.
Okay. Ticaps,
stand
yeah.
corrected, but that's what they, because I've heard it now quite a few times on the
It's a
radio.
dictionary, yeah.
So it's called capsa. So they're actually trying to establish that we have a language. So you get you get Afrikaans language and even words like so we know we have the Dutch influence here. So sometimes if you I remember I was at Medina Institute and there was an individual there that was Dutch. And just to test all of us, so he spoke in Dutch, and we were shocked by the fact that we could understand more or less what he was saying. But we have that influence.
Because it's similar to the Afrikaans that we know, eh?
It's so similar. Yeah. So we have that influence, but then look at the fact that we also have our Malaysian, Indonesian influence there. So now combining that two, and that's where we sit now. So we're sitting with what they, I stand corrected, but I think it would be caps. So and they're trying to say this is our heritage, this is our language that we're coming forth with, and that we have to start teaching our kids this. And recently I've actually heard someone say, but it sounds so I don't know a nicer word of saying like slums. So that come across very
like
nice.
Slang, yeah.
Yes, like slang. Yeah. So they would say it sounds like this, but I mean, we're not taking pride with where this came from. Even words like pisang. So pisang it's not an Afrikaans word. It didn't come from Dutch, etc. Yes, it actually came from outside, like Indonesia, Malaysia, those places. Okay. They didn't have a word for that, and then our people started calling it, saying, "Oh, this is a pisang," and then that's how we got. So it's so many fascinating stories you can come with that. So these are important things to teach our kids, that it's not embarrassing or so to use this language, but you should be proud when using this language because of our rich heritage and how these individuals that were brought from all over the world here, how they established and how they rooted themselves and how they protected and preserved our Islam here. Because remember, if you're coming down as a prisoner, you're not going to bring your books, your Ghazali books, your Shafi'i books, and all those books. You're not going to bring those things. So how is it that they came over here and they established Islam? It's from memory. They established this from memory. Our Quran that we have at the Awal Masjid, from memory. So we really have to, and look at us. Myself, even embarrassingly enough, I would have to refer quite a bit to books if I want to give a talk or whatever it is. But these individuals didn't have time to prepare or do all these things or create a khutbah and things like that. No, they were brought over as prisoners and they had to teach the language that they knew. And I'm so happy you mentioned the Haddad. So here we would say Haddad. Yes. But actually it's the Ratbul Haddad. So it sounds so beautiful, but alhamdulillah, so we shortened it, now we say Haddad. Yes. So
and then once when you go to like we've learned now Islamic teachings, you go and you learn about where it comes from. So now you say the beautiful Ratbul Haddad and how better it sounds. But that Haddad still is within us. We still say that. Yasmina, sorry to break you, but we quickly need to pay the bills. When we come back, we continue this conversation. Parents' guidance on our rich cultural backgrounds and how we balance that between, our Islamic identities from diversity around the world that's brought us here to South Africa, to Cape Town, or wherever you find yourself, and how we balance that with still practicing our Islam. More just after this. Stay with us. Welcome back, Assalamu alaikum, and a very good day to you. We're chatting about balancing cultural and Islamic identities. Many Muslim families navigate between these cultural practices and Islamic teachings, and we're just discussing how we can bring a balance to that cultural diversity within Islam, and to appreciate it, to learn it, to understand how this cultural influences our life, and also as parents, how we need to guide and shape our children's identities and provide them the guidance that is rooted in Islamic values while still respecting and appreciating their cultural heritage. There's the traditions and the rituals that we practice, the jargon, slang that we might use. It's even a dictionary, I think, called CAPS that you can relate to. I know in the Cape Town tradition, and I'm sure you need to establish yours wherever you're coming from, but also not to lose it at all, because that is who we are. We're online with Yasmina, Samaai, all the way from the beautiful mother city in Cape Town. And there's such a rich heritage there that we still foster and we love, and we need to educate our children about. So, Yasmina, education and communication also plays an important role. That understanding that the community, individuals within our communities, how we need to latch on to them, the peers and their cultural heritage, and not losing that traditions and rituals. So, let's look at how sometimes that we need to address generational differences. Are you still with us, Yasmina?
Yes.
So now with the younger generation, we before we get into that, I rudely interrupted about the Haddad and how we beautifully learn, the correct way of saying it, but still keeping that slang in us. Just to elaborate on that again, Marv. You may continue.
Yes, but that actually ties into what you are mentioning now about the community, because so the Ratu Haddad, let's say the Haddad, so and our Mawluds and things, our Dhikr, Jama'ah, and our Thursday night get-togethers and things like this. So actually these things came down, like I've mentioned, from slavery and political prisoners, etc. So these things actually came down and was a way to preserve our Islam, because in during that time you couldn't exactly teach or preach your Islam, but they were able to do they were able to do the Haddad, so the dhikrs, the remembrance of Allah. So they were able to do that freely because it was melodious in its tune. So the oppressors at that time would see it as, okay, these are like slavery songs and things like that they were singing. Little did they know that what they were actually singing was remembrance of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, and that actually instilled that unity, that strength and that belief in Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, and the freedom they would get, inshallah, and that perseverance, it connected them. So it was seen as something that slaves would sing, but it was a way of actually preserving our Islam, because within these with the remembrance of Allah and the dhikrs, the Quran would also then be recited. So not only are you teaching Islam, but you're also teaching the Quran, and you are able to then, so the slaves, etc., around, they would be able to then memorize the various surah in the Quran just by this melodious tune, by singing together, etc. So this is also how we were able to preserve it. So if you look at that history and look at where our hadats came from, our remembrance of all our dhikrs, etc. So and I've seen now recently that there are people that will ask me questions like, oh, can I go to the hadat? Is it haram? Is it bid'ah? Is it this? And I understand, because we have various influences at the moment. So I'm not here saying it's right or it's wrong, and etc. But I think before you make those decisions, you have to get different opinions on this to understand, is it actually haram? Is it makruh? Is it sunnah? Is it whatever? Is it mustahab? Whatever it is. And then see where does it stem from? And if we see in our heritage where these dhikrs are stemming from, then these are ways that we bring the community together. So you mentioned the community. So these are the things that as community members we can come together and we can do these dhikrs, the remembrance of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. And then we can also, so we have our mawluds also that we have, and so we know we are famous for our mawluds and the outfits that the females would wear, and how they would go all out. And I remember as a child I would have to wear flower girl dresses, and we would have to cut rampies during that time.
The lemon leaves,
all these things. Yes, this is our heritage. These are the rich things that we have and must preserve. And what did it actually do? It brought together communities, because what you do after that, you serve food to the underprivileged, you serve food to the community, you bring people together. And you would say, oh, you just bring the community together. No, what actually happens at those places? You see family members you haven't seen in a long time. Single individuals are able to see potential spouses at those kinds of, because now you see not only is, okay, obviously you're a Muslim if you're here, but you also see we have similar cultures. Because remember, the cultures are also important because we have our religion and we have our foundations in Islam, yes, but the cultural impacts that we also have also affects the spouses that we take. But we can speak in more detail about that. But so these are the places and where we see people that are like-minded. We preserve our Islam. We keep together. We keep communities together. It's not only weddings and janazas and things like this. If we have these things within our community, it will be great. And then also to just take a step back, and we don't only have the Malaysian and Indonesian influence here, we have a large Indian influence also here that was also brought down. And I think they are doing, maybe I would even argue, a better job than what we are in preserving that culture. So if we look at their practices and their foods, they are doing a great job in preserving that. And the rest of us, we should keep up in preserving all our cultures and be able to practice that freely and not be shy of our origins, which are as communities.
I love how you implement, the different cultures, and not just the cultures, but religions at the beginning of the show, because we have our children intermingling with much more than we did before, other races and other religions. So we are marrying Hindus coming into our religion, into our family. We are marrying the African culture. I heard a story as well of this imam, his son was going to get married to, someone from the African culture, and he had to go and pay la bola or understand what does that mean, or they had to pay la bola. I don't know. I just know that he said he went to the la bola meeting. So all of this is not things that we need to shun, but I want to look at addressing, generational differences when we often hear, no, this is like, which is a common a slang for Afrikaans word, oudtijds, you older. This is now for the old people. So the younger generations often are exposed to these different cultural influences. So how can we as family bridge that generational gap and facilitate rather the constructive conversations, the construction exposure about culture and our Islamic identities, also not to shun what is present in our country?
Yes, so this is very important, and so I within my practice I also do it with actually quite a bit of marital counseling, premarital, etc. And you would actually be very shocked at how. So you would think, okay, but you're marrying a Muslim and you would have common grounds, etc. But the cultural aspect of things makes a massive difference, because you would come and you would say things like, I grew up in this way and this is what was normal in my house, but now I'm marrying into another family and this is what's different in their house. Just this past weekend, I held a females function and we spoke about rights and responsibilities and things like that. And they would break up in little groups and they would speak about various marital things, etc. And something that came up is, and they don't know how to put a name to it, but it's cultural differences. So what a typical example would be, maybe you grew up in a certain household where males had certain duties, females had certain duties, but it maybe worked well together, etc. And that was your norm. Now you're getting married to an individual with a different culture, but now you're realizing, oh, but in this, I would say culture, because I mean tradition and things that were practiced and embedded over the many years. So here we have that households are male dominated, and yes, Islam, we know that the within the household the male is the dominant figure. Yes, but now it's that way you can't question what the male says or the father says within the family. You can't interact freely. There's certain ways that you address each other, things like that, and this is not normal for you. It might even make you feel a little bit isolated or whatever it is, because you don't properly fit in. And actually, you mentioned now the African culture, and yes, because like you said, we are intermarrying now, and this is not a bad thing, because remember we have the foundation of our Islam. And as long as the couple that gets married has a proper way to filter these things. So in other words, if you are able to tell what is right and wrong within the Sharia, then you are able to say, okay, but these cultural practices that you have within your family, it actually contradicts what our Sharia teaches us, and therefore we cannot do this to A, B, and C. So it's not me, Yasmina, saying to my spouse, we cannot practice this because I said so. This is not what I did. It's not me against you, but rather it's the overarching powers, the Sharia. What else want I deem to be correct and incorrect. So that would be then our guiding principle. But this only works if both of you are knowledgeable in this aspect and you respect that it's not what he says, she says, but it's actually what Islam says. And this also comes with us as parents. So how do we educate our children? Because like I just mentioned now, we have the an Indian influence, we have African influence, cultures, we have all those, we have the Malaysian, Indonesian, we have all of that. So how as parents would we then create that tolerance within our children to be able to understand that this is cultural practices that they do within their homes, but that is okay and that is not against the Sharia. It's not something to frown upon, to look down upon them for. And even in dressing, so you might dress a certain way because you have a particular culture, but your hair is covered, your body is covered, your aura is still covered. So why is it that you are looking down on these things? So as parents, we create this tolerance. And as a community, what we could do to be able to create this tolerance within the community is, and I know schools have this oftentimes, is when you have this cultural day. So when you have, maybe we can have it at the massages and things like that, when everybody comes dressed in their various cultures, with the uniforms and things like that, and then they make the different foods. I think denim place, things like that. So that I think has maybe Indonesian, Malaysian influence. I'm not too sure. But then we have quite a few Indian dishes that we also have over here, African dishes that we also have, all halal, but different origins. So we bring all of that together and we come in our various outfits. And then we are able to then, share with the communities, this is what our culture, this is what we have in our culture. It's halal, there's nothing wrong with it, but we create that tolerance within our children and the generations to come.
And I think it's important when we do have these conversations, we have it not just with our children, but the children need to have it with their friends that are exposed to different cultures. Because I heard here in Joburg, oh no, I only thought Islam was Indian. Like if you were Indian, you were Islam, you were Muslim. So only Indians are Muslims. I said, no, Muslims are all over the world. They're from Norway to America to Asia. So it's important that these conversations come up with our children, because my children are attending a school where there's like lots of African cultures. So they just want to bring everybody to Islam. So it's so beautiful that we do not lose that. More after the short break, balancing your cultural diversity, the differences, and still sticking to Islamic principles is what we need to educate our children about in happy, healthy parenting. We continue this conversation with social worker Yasmina just after this. Stay with us. Balancing our rich cultural heritage as well as introducing and keeping in line with our Islamic principles and understanding how well that can actually work together. And our forefathers, our grandparents are all great examples where that has been implemented. So let's use it within our parenting, and you can discuss and interact with us. If you're listening to us across the lands and over the beautiful seas, please still do that via email or WhatsApp. And you can watch us on www.hilaal.tv right now, if you've got some friends and colleagues overseas. But we'd love to hear your point of view on this topic and other topics within parenting, creating that healthy, happy family in your happy home. And it is a series we continue to do with our social worker and Anima, Yasmina, Samaai, Sali, all the way from the Western Cape. So Yasmina, just before the break, you introduced these gender roles and how that cultural practices sometimes does enhance specific gender roles. So in some culture, gender roles may differ from what Islamic principles are. How can families navigate these differences while still ensuring that fairness, which is often a discussion that, this is 50-50 or this is unfair, and we need to still adhere within our Islamic values and not losing that. Our principles are still in place. And possibly using the roles of our Sahaba and our Prophet ﷺ in this specific topic.
Yes, so definitely it does. So culture definitely influences gender roles as well. But when you look at culture influencing gender roles, we're actually supposed to take a step out and look at, okay, but what does Islam say about the gender roles? Yeah. And a perfect example, like you mentioned, is look at the Nabi Sallallahu Alaihi Wasallam, and he was speaking to Fatima radiallahu anha and Ali, and he was actually speaking about what are the duties of the two. And he said, Ali, your duties are outside of the home. And Fatima, your duties are within the home. So This is a very simple hadith to refer to, just to give you an idea of, okay, that was what was the norm, not only in that society, but that was what the Nabi Sallallahu Alaihi Wasallam advised them with. So, but I am not blinded to the fact that in today's time, it's very difficult to be able to just cope, to be able to live from day to day without having both spouses working. And that is why, not to say don't follow what the Quran is trying to say, I would never say that. But you also have to take into consideration the context at that time and what was normal at that time. So if you look at things now and you're wanting to take those ahadith or those stories of the Sahabas and things like that and just print it within what you're facing right now, it's very difficult, because can you understand that if you are a husband and a wife, and honestly, it sounds like something that is why I know this is the issue, but I deal with this on a weekly basis, how much marital issues come from this, where it's needed for the husband and wife to be able to work to survive within our context today, to be able to put food on the table, to be able to pay rent and things like that. So it takes husband and wife to do that. Now, can we already see from the get-go that is not what was practiced in the past, in the context of the stories that we pull over here in our Jumu'ah lectures. So now you're wanting to bring it in the home and say, yeah, well, you work 8 to 4, 5 or so, and you also, and you as the husband and the wife both had those long days, but now you still want to enforce the fact that but your place is in the house and you have to do house duties and I do my duties outside of the home. But you have to understand that she's now also doing duties outside of the home, which is actually not compulsory upon her to have to see to the family and nafaqah. So now you have to actually find balance. So if you're sharing duties outside of the home, you should then share duties within the home. So that's just a simple example. But definitely culture does impact us in it could be negatively as well. And I heard a female say my shuyukh said that he was listening to a female complain about something, and this is within the same sentence. So I don't like to say stories that are the third speaker or so, but just to take the lesson out of this. So what happened was the mother would say, my son, within the home, I'm so upset with my daughter-in-law because my son has to do A, B, and C in the house, and he's like a slave, and he wasn't treated like this. Yes, and she goes on like that on the rant. Then in the same note, she says, my daughter again, my daughter's treated like a queen. Her husband has everything for her.
Yes.
But she's not taking into consideration.
That's what Islam
You're
says.
saying it's exactly the opposite. So your husband is doing that for somebody else's daughter, but you're not okay with that. But somebody else's son is doing that for your daughter, but you're okay with that. So it's very important that you realize that you're not raising your children for yourself, for your own home. You're raising your children for somebody else's daughter or son. You're raising your child to be the leaders of progeny to come, to be a leader within the community, to be a leader within whatever jobs it is that they take one day. So these are all the things we have to take into consideration. You have a cultural influence, yes. But we have to take it, and we have the Quran and our Sunnah, and we have all those contexts taken into consideration, yes. But we have to look at right now, what context do you find yourself in? And then also then see, okay, but if that is the case, you must give and take to a certain extent.
I'm so glad you brought that example, because just yesterday again in this gathering I was sitting in, and this very rich Indian culture here in Johannesburg, this auntie was saying, no, the daughters-in-law of today, they just sit around, they don't do anything. Whereas their role was, when they were a daughter-in-law, you had to hop, skip, and jump and do roller coasters all around your mother-in-law to make them happy. And basically, you had to be, the carer of the family. Now the daughters-in-law is in luxury, and like you said, the roles change. But yet again, we can take some examples of the Prophet ﷺ. He washed his clothes, he mended his clothes, he did housework. Our Sahabas went out in the middle of the night. A beautiful example: we went to go look after a widow and her children. So all these, messages and I think, hadiths and lives of our beautiful scholars and our prophets, alhamdulillah, that we can take and still implement it in today, but in the context of what we're living in. So we also need to know, with these instances, like you said, you often see couples, and these are the major the major downfalls, and it affects the family. It ripples down to the children. So now let's talk about seeking guidance from Islamic scholars when faced with these cultural dilemmas, and the pure example, like you say, balancing work and family life, as well as still practicing your Islam in a way that you want your family to be stable. How important is it for families to seek guidance from Islamic scholars, and what role can these scholars play in helping families strike a balance between cultural and Islamic identities?
Yes, so this is a very good question. And like you mentioned, yes, so when I do quite a bit of counseling, then I would see that they did many a times go to ulama or imams, leaders within the community. They would ask guidance on particular issues. And now I have to start by saying I love my teachers. I love the work that these imams are doing. I appreciate all the studies that they did, etc. However, I'm finding that there's this culture where some ulama, some leaders are not able to say, I don't know. So, and this is sad, to be able to give references. And there are even some scholars that will admit that, the last time I opened a book to do research was years, ages ago. And that's not a flex, but that's actually very sad, because those individuals that you are giving advice to depend on the fact that you are giving them opinions, etc., that's rooted within our books, within our scholars, our knowledge scholars. So I would definitely say, when you are seeking guidance, and one of my teachers always say, don't shop for various fatwas around that suits you.
Yes,
but I would
yes.
say, go around and seek. Say we have a particular question, go around and ask different scholars what is their take on this. Because remember, you might go to one scholar that only studied the Shafi'i madhab. Now you're going to another scholar that studied the Hanafi madhab. Now you're going to another scholar that didn't even study fiqh. He studied a different science, but he's giving advice within fiqh, aqidah, etc. And this is not something that he's strong in. So I would say, go around and ask various scholars. And whatever it is that the issue that you have, cultural differences, etc., go to a scholar that is in the field of the issue that you have. Because alhamdulillah, we are lucky that we have these scholars available to us today. And I think a sign of a good scholar is somebody that's able to give you references. And don't think that because you are of the masses, etc., and you come into the ulama and you're asking them a question, that they don't owe you a reference. I think this is very important. Even with my clients, if they come and they ask me a question, even if I haven't answered right to the top of my head that I want to say, perhaps I'll say it at the time, but I would say, give me a chance to do more research. I'll even give them references for what I'm about to say. Because if they are being held up by family members or in-laws or ulama, whatever, or courts, etc., they're able to reference and say, these are the opinions coming from these books, from these scholars within those madhab. You understand? So that's a sign of a good alim, etc., if you go to them. And I would say, don't go to one, try and find various opinions, because you don't know what their cultural influences again.
Unfortunately, that's where we have to stop it. Stop our interview. We're looking forward to our next happy, healthy families, raising a happy, healthy family in your happy home with our Islamic therapist, Yasmina Samaai Saleh. Shukran again for your time. And as an Islamic therapist, we appreciate your support for these individuals and families to help us navigate the complexities of cultural and Islamic identities. Shukran for your time, and assalamu alaikum.
Wa alaikum assalam wa rahmatullah.
There we have it. Do connect with her as well on her various social media pages, the Islamic therapist. But stay tuned as we catch our Yasmina, our Islamic therapist, next as we talk about compassion and discipline, balancing compassion and discipline in our next show with our Islamic therapist. From myself, Hawa Solomon, for now, we wrap up, but stay tuned for our next show as we speak about the cultural differences within families, within the community, and mental health. We speak to psychologist Mohammed Uzair Bamji, and we're very excited about that show as well. So stay tuned. From myself, Hawa Solomon, for now, wassalamu alaikum and goodbye.